The ranch sat alone at the edge of the red desert, where the land went quiet enough to hear your own thoughts turn against you, and Elias Crow liked it that way, because silence never lied and people always did. He was known around the nearest town as a loner, a man who kept to himself, paid in silver, spoke in nods, and never drank long enough to invite questions, and that alone made him dangerous in the eyes of men who fed on fear. On the night the gang rode in, the moon was thin as a knife and the wind carried the smell of dust and old blood, and 5 riders approached like wolves who had already decided the hunt was over. They were led by Harlan Pike, a man whose reputation was stitched together from robberies, burnings, and shallow graves, a man who smiled when others begged. And tonight he smiled because he believed Elias Crow was just another weak soul hiding behind wood and wire. The gang dismounted, boots thudding against dry earth, rifles loose in their hands, laughter low and cruel, already imagining how the rancher would kneel or run or die. Harlan raised a hand and they spread out surrounding the house. But before he gave the order to kick the door in, something caught his eye, something carved deep into the wood beside the doorframe, old and deliberate, not decorative, not careless. It was a symbol, worn by time but unmistakable, a Cherokee mark known only to those who had seen war before it had names, a mark meaning bloodbound survivor, and Harlan's breath hitched as recognition crawled up his spine like a spider. The laughter died instantly. One of the men whispered a curse. Another stepped back without realizing it. Because that mark was not given, it was earned. Carved only by those who had walked out of massacres when entire families had not. Men who had learned how to disappear into smoke and return as death itself. Harlan tried to laugh it off, but his voice cracked. And in that moment, the door creaked open slowly. Not in fear, but in patience. And Elias Crow stepped out into the moonlight, calm, eyes dark, posture relaxed like a man greeting a storm he had already survived. He didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't speak. He just stood there and the wind shifted, carrying the memory of screams that none of the gang had lived through but all of them, somehow felt. And for the first time since they had mounted their horses, every man there understood something terrible and irreversible. They had not come to hunt a loner. They had come to stand on the doorstep of a survivor who had nothing left to lose. And if you want to know why 5 armed men froze in silence before one quiet rancher, then stay with this story. Because what that mark meant was written in blood, and by the end of this tale, you'll understand why legends don't announce themselves. They wait. And if stories like this grip your soul, make sure you subscribe now. Because this is only the beginning. Elias finally spoke, and when he did, his voice was steady, low, and carried the weight of years buried under dirt and fire, and he asked them one simple question. Who sent you? Because men like him didn't fear death. They only measured responsibility. Harlan swallowed and lied, because lying was the only weapon he had left. But Elias smiled faintly, not in humor but in recognition, the kind a butcher gives livestock, and he stepped aside, revealing the inside of the cabin, just enough for the lantern, light to spill out and illuminate what hung on the far wall: scalps, old rifles, broken sabers, military buttons, and faded cloth marked with the same Cherokee symbols. Trophies not taken in pride, but kept as reminders of promises fulfilled. Elias spoke then of his past, not boasting, just stating facts the way one recites weather, how he was born to a Cherokee mother and an Army Scout father, how he watched his village burn when he was still small enough to hide, beneath floorboards, how he learned that survival was not about strength but memory, about never forgetting the sound a man makes before he dies, or the way fear smells when it knows it's too late. He told them about the massacre at Sand Creek, about riding through smoke so thick it turned daylight into night, about carving that mark into his door after the last body was buried, because that door was the only thing he had left that belonged to him. The gang listened without breathing, weapons heavy in their hands, useless now, because every word stripped away their courage like skin from bone. One of the men bolted, couldn't take it, ran for his horse, and the crack of Elias's rifle echoed once, clean and final, dropping the man face first into the dirt before he'd taken 3 steps. Elias didn't flinch. He didn't rush. He just reloaded slowly and said, that was mercy, and the others believed him. Harlan tried to bargain then, offering gold, women, safe passage, anything, but Elias shook his head. Because some debts couldn't be paid forward, only settled. He told them they had a choice, and that was the cruelest part. Because choice meant responsibility, and responsibility was heavier than fear. 2 men dropped their guns and fell to their knees, begging, swearing they were followers, not killers, and Elias studied them the way a judge studies a final plea, then told them to leave, to walk into the desert and never return, because the land would decide if they deserved to live. The remaining two stood frozen, pride locking their legs. And when Harlan finally raised his gun, Elias was already moving, a blur of instinct and memory, and the night erupted into violence so fast it barely existed, gunfire flashing like lightning, bodies falling like punctuation marks at the end of a sentence that had been written long before. When it was over, Elias stood alone again, breathing steady, surrounded by the silence he had earned, and the wind carried the truth far across the plains. Some doors, enemies away, but to remind fate itself to tread carefully. And if you're still watching, subscribe now, because stories like this don't get told twice. Dawn came slow and pale, washing the desert clean of shadows but not of consequences, and Elias buried the dead with the same care he once buried his family. Because respect was not something you offered only to the innocent. It was something you gave to the land so it wouldn't turn against you. By mid-morning, riders from town appeared, drawn by smoke and rumor, and they stopped when they saw the bodies, the door, the mark, and the man standing beside it like a gravestone that breathed. No one asked questions. No one raised a weapon. They simply nodded, understanding passing between them like a shared secret. Because legends move faster than horses in places like this, Elias didn't stay long after that. He packed light, left the ranch as it was, door still standing, mark still carved deep. Because it was never about the house, it was about the warning. And warnings only matter when someone is alive to read them. Years later, men would swear they saw him riding along the horizon at dusk, helping settlers one day and vanishing the next. And children would grow up hearing stories about the rancher with the Cherokee Mark, about how gangs learned too late that survival was not weakness, it was education paid for in blood. And that is how legends are born in the Wild West, not through noise or fame, but through moments when cruelty meets memory and blinks first. If this story kept you listening, if it made you feel the dust, the fear, and the justice of the old frontier, then don't let it end here. Subscribe to the channel now, because every mark has a story, every legend has a beginning, and the next one might be even darker than this.